Yes, and I would like to combine the two questions, one about democracy and one when and how it will happen. I'm not foolish enough to predict when and how it will happen. I think it can happen in a week, it can happen in a year, it can happen in 10 years. Having grown up in a communist country, I know that folly can last for a very long time. Communism can last for decades. But the EU is not the Soviet Union. The countries in the common currency are not totalitarian, authoritarian. And that is why those questions are very much interrelated. So the exit will be triggered by democratic pressure that will prove unstoppable. It will almost certainly occur over the weekend. Then there will be a bank holiday, and maybe this weekend the Greeks have their elections. There will be bank holidays. But you see, what is so complicating is the euro. I mean, your question was spot on. Why are we focusing just on euro? Well, this session happens to be about the Eurozone. I mean, I have views on, I have some students here who might be able to testify that I have views on German literature, or opera, or cinema, or love, or whatever. Very firm views on every one of them. But I was asked to talk about the Eurozone. and the global economy is in a very bad shape, the American economy is in a very bad shape, so is the British economy. But what makes the Eurozone crisis worse is what Bill Mitchell said. They don't have it in their own currency. They lost control over their destiny. So that is one significant difference, I think, that matters, and that's with democracy, and then it comes together. Because once a country decides to leave, we know that there are no legal mechanisms for a country to leave the single currency. There are legal mechanisms for departing the European Union. But we also know that once you leave the currency, you can no longer live up to the 4 basic freedoms that are at the heart of the European project. I was in Iceland last year. Iceland recovered remarkably well after this catastrophe that we experienced. It didn't guarantee bondholders, unlike Ireland, and it had its own currency. But it also imposed capital flight controls. People cannot, private individuals cannot take their money abroad. They cannot sell their house to a foreigner or whatever. So that country was not in the EU, was not in the single currency, could deal with its own problems. And any country that will pursue that kind of Icelandic path will also, at least for a period of time, have to detach itself from the European Union. I'm just hoping that despite all this, European solidarity will prevail, because that is when it will be needed more than ever. These countries will need assistance badly. And for Greeks to ask for more assistance after those 2 bailouts that manifestly have failed, that will be a tough call. But that's the only way. I just can't see how those asymmetries can be addressed within the constraints of the single currency.
I think the Greek people actually wanted those bailouts, by the way.
No, that's right.
Sure. Yes, I'll keep my comments very brief because I want to make sure that we hear David's concluding comments. I think obviously the other speakers have already made a connection between you two questions. I think it's clear that the economic crisis has now become a political crisis, and that political crisis is not just a crisis in the periphery, in those crises that are in those countries that are in crisis, like Greece. Obviously, the Greek elections, in fact, deliver a government that will refuse. They will refuse what has been pushed as the official policy of the Eurozone. That it's also the crisis in reaching those people that are the donors, if you want, of aid to the countries that are struggling. We see the situation in the Netherlands. We see unstable governments. We have seen also the rise of the extreme right, which has made it more difficult for the mainstream parties, both right and left, to secure a governing majority. In terms of what that means, I think that it's all interconnected. So I think that obviously the Greek election, that's one factor. The French elections, Stefan has already alluded to it, what it means. But there is also the German elections next year in September, and that's my last point, because I suppose, Stefan, you talked about what were again the 2 pillars of the German success in the post-war war. It was the Rechtsstaat and?
The commitment to Europe.
Yes, commitment to Europe, you forgot a third. And that was the Soziale Marktwirtschaft, which was a compromise, if you want, between ordoliberalism, so between strong attachment to certain economic liberal principles, and the strong commitment to social cohesion, which cut across both Christian democracy and socialism, the two political families that were important in Germany. Now, there are kind of things that Bill described in terms of the strategies used by Germany, which experienced its own growth problems and which experienced its own budget problems, which led to the crisis of 2005, was to actually wind down the social market economy, to wind down the German welfare state. So it is also an unstable situation in Germany. Merkel's hold on power is 10 years, because it was built on an alliance with the liberals, and we don't know what will happen then. So in response to your question, I think it's that whole electoral situation, which is not just British, which is the Netherlands, which is France, which is Germany, and which will, to my mind, determine whether a third way or fourth way, did you say, David? Right? Might actually be arrived at through the consensus and debate which European countries were successful in establishing up until the crisis, which, as you pointed out, did not come within Europe, came from outside, but unfortunately encountered a form of monetary union which had great weaknesses, which is what Bill's paper, I think, explained. And I will end on this, and for you, David, to give us optimistic remarks, because we had a very pessimistic discussion. There's a number of people commenting.
Bit of Irish.
Yeah. Now, I think that we've been honoured by a very interesting evening. We're very grateful to the exposition by Professor Bill Mitchell from his perspective of the crisis, economic crisis in Europe, in particular the euro. And we've heard points of disagreement, mostly ideological, from Dr. Stefan Auer, and also points of agreement. Now, there are a couple of points I'd like myself to pick up on, shifting my chairman's hat only slightly to one side. First is a question of the democratic question. Where is democracy in all of this? This is a very complicated issue. If in Australia, or if in any European country member of the European Union, if you have the man and woman in the street feeling in any way distanced from their political elite, then you have, that is a serious issue for society. Now, the difference between Australia and the European country in this example is that in the case of the European country, any difference like that people may feel about whether they trust their political elite or not, and so on, and the degree to which they do, that also impacts immediately also on European issues, because it affects all political issues. So it affects European issues as well. This is something just to bear in mind. Now, how is the European citizenry, if you like, consulted on issues like the euro? Let's have the euro as a currency. The way that the European Union works is we still have a Europe of sovereign countries, where they agree in certain areas to pool their sovereignty, to do things in an integrated way together to varying degrees. And these decisions are written up in legal texts of treaties, which are intergovernmental and have to be ratified across the range of countries. Now, in some member states of the European Union, that process involves a direct consultation of the people. There are referenda on these issues. In other countries, there are different systems. Germany, I think, has a constitutional ban on a referendum. The point I want to make is that European countries are different, and each has its own political culture and history, and so these EU treaties get ratified naturally according to the system of the country. Now, that is something, again, just a point to bear in mind in relation to, whether in all countries all citizens have directly voted on accepting the Maastricht Treaty or not. Now, wider question on democracy is that one of the things that I think we are seeing in Europe right now is a renewed debate about Europe, fueled by the crisis, which is putting in the center stage, in front of European electorates, the fundamental questions about the European Union, and in particular about the euro as a currency and the system of how to manage the euro currency. This, I think, fundamentally, when you step back from the detail, we will see that we're having this is a healthy democratic situation that we're in, that we have a renewed public debate on Europe. The European Union is a political construction. We have the European Union, and we have the euro, I would suggest, because we wanted to have them. We're not forced to have the European Union, we're not forced to have the euro as the currency. But it is very important that it is understood why we have these things. Why have we opted for these? Why have we made these choices that Bill has rightly pointed out? We have opted for a particular type of system. So it is important that we have this political debate, and this is happening. Now, it's very easy to look at certain situations in certain countries and say, oh look, there's clearly a failure or a casualty. I mean, last week, the Dutch government was working on a package of fiscal consolidation measures and wasn't able to get agreement on one part of it had been supporting the government. But they continued to work, and by the end of the week, they had agreement on the package, but bringing in others from the political spectrum, bringing in opposition as part of that agreement. Now, is this a negative or a positive? You can have a big debate about that. The point I want to make is that it's not to be naturally or automatically assumed that because a party supporting the Dutch government didn't follow the package and couldn't support it, that in itself is not necessarily a negative because of what happened. And what happened in the Netherlands was a broadening of the issue to bring others into the tent to support the package. You can have a debate about the nature of the package, whether it's good or bad and so on. Stefan, I know that you're very anxious to leave, but there are a couple of points you made which I want to
diplomatic scandal.
Yeah. One point that you made is you spoke about Germany in terms of more and more people are hating German. Now, this is language which you may sincerely hold that view that people hate Germany, but I can tell you that in Europe, this is language from a different era, and I think it is possible to conduct a debate on the issue without resorting to it. Why is this point important? It is important for understanding the politics behind so much of what we do in the European Union. We have created a different Europe from the Europe that we had at the end of the Second World War. Now, part of that has been to to work together to break out of the cycle of hatred and war which we had been in. And the substantive point that I would take from your reference there is that because of the current crisis, people across Europe are asking themselves fundamental questions. You know, is it the case that Germany is imposing something on us, and should we accept that? And how does that make us feel about Germans? Well, there are lots of different ways that you can look at that, and I think that, as Natalie has pointed out, there's a series of these events, and I'm sure on future occasions more weight will be given to these more positive aspects. The weaknesses, I want to make 2 points that are related. The weaknesses of Europe, we have to understand that the European Union, and including the euro, is still a work in progress. The crisis has illustrated a number of severe weaknesses in the euro, and European leaders have taken the time and are making the effort to try and correct some of these weaknesses. We don't have a unitary state, we don't have common economic policy or fiscal policy, but we do have new tools in terms of having a stronger economic and fiscal policy coordination between the countries of the Eurozone. So this is a step in the direction of addressing that weakness. You can have a debate about whether that step goes too far or not far enough. Equally, the Queensland issue, we don't have a fiscal union. But 2 years ago, we didn't have any means of tackling that issue directly. But the Greek crisis forced leaders to concede that we actually do need a pot of money to help Greece out right now. And 3 weeks later, they agreed, actually we need some sort of temporary fund of money as a firewall to protect other member states that may need some help. Now, then it was again decided, actually we don't need that as a temporary fund, we should have that as a tool in our toolbox as part of the normal functioning of the euro. As Bill has pointed out, you can have very different, you can have an argument about these things, whether this is helping or this is not helping. And you can have Stefan's point about how long will this take. Well, if the euro collapses in 300 years' time, Stefan will have been proven right. You know, but maybe it will be next week, and I doubt it. The point is that all of this is in evolution, and we have given ourselves new tools for managing the euro system. We've also demonstrated that when we think that these new tools are themselves immediately insufficient, we've been resilient enough to say they have been insufficient. What was for Greece has been expanded. What was expanded temporarily been made permanent. Now, this is where I would disagree with Stefan's Herbert Stein quote. If something cannot go on forever, it will stop. Now, I think in the case of the European Union and in the case of the euro, I would prefer to say if it can't go on forever, it will either stop or it will evolve. And I think that is what we're looking at. Now, this is much harder to articulate because it's to articulate it most fully, you have to have a vision of exactly what is the end destination. And there you can have 27 different official views of what that might be, and you can have 500 million different personal views of Europeans as to what the end destination is. But I think one thing is clear, that there is a huge political underpinning, and this comes to your fundamental point. There's a huge political underpinning of the euro as a political project for Europe, and that is not to be underestimated. Neither is the resilience of the European Union to be able to cope with crises and to become stronger and move on. Now, this is a point where I think I will stop, or we will end up having another seminar later now, and everybody's hearing might be
Thank you very much.